Mace, Mark Smith, Jarrod Brooks, and Shawn Pinkston are all vying for the hotly contested South Carolina House District 99 seat. In this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups, I sit down with Jarrod Brooks one-on-one. And be sure to download the free Quintin's Close-Ups app in your Apple or Google Play stores.
Well, Jarrod,
Hey,
it is so good to see you again.
good to see you, Quintin.
I appreciate this.
Good.
You know, the last time I saw you was 2 weeks ago.
That's right.
When I moderated the House District 99 debate, where I actually formed at the North Charleston City Hall.
Yeah, great job with that.
Oh, thank you. First time ever doing that, so.
Were you as nervous as the candidates?
I was. I was.
How can that be when you're the one asking the questions?
You know, there's a difference between doing these and then actually performing and you have an audience.
Yeah.
I mean, I do have an audience here, but
Right.
it's different, you know.
A little more scripted?
Right, yeah, yeah. We had like 15 questions with a 2-hour debate, so
Right.
I had to use a little bit of Quintin's close-ups during that forum, so that was fun.
Right.
And I want to basically pick up where we left off there,
Okay.
because I know when doing that particular forum, that is, you advocated term limits.
Right.
And a lot of people don't know who Jarrod Brooks is.
Okay.
So tell us, why Jarrod Brooks, why House District 99?
Okay. Yeah. That's a fair question. I get. I'm sure it's a question every candidate gets. It actually we had a forum last night on Daniel Island,
Right.
and it was asked, why in the world would you put yourself through this? And a lot of people who asked that said, hey, I don't know what you stand for yet, but I do admire you and I do thank you for putting yourself out there. And so I think everybody who decides to run for office, which I would recommend to anybody, it's been a fantastic experience.
Okay.
But I think what has me talking to you now instead of doing my normal job is
Right.
the way I felt about the corruption and the cronyism and how it stands in the way of the progress in our state. And so that was the initial issue that I wanted to talk about in
Right.
this campaign, and the further I've gotten into it, the more I've realized how central it is to everything that we're trying to accomplish. And I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk about specific examples,
Right.
but it's laser focused to me on why this is so important. And first of all, term limits is something I've always believed in, and it's probably one of the largest conservative grassroots movement that has ever existed, and it may extend well beyond conservatism to anyone who's concerned about good efficient government. And from there, other ideas were born, and it's become. I mean, I've always kept up with issues, even more so now because you've got to be a little more informed if you're going to put yourself out there to be a candidate. And now more than ever, I've realized that ethics and the way people go about doing their business is central to fixing all of the other problems. And myself and the other candidates
Right.
and everybody we've talked to
Right.
worried about roads, education, infrastructure, economic development, port, the SE&G debacle.
Right.
What's the other big one I've been asked about? Benefits for state workers.
Right.
And all of these things I think are offshoots of this central issue of we cannot fix those issues, at least in the time frame that we want them, which is faster rather than slower, unless we begin to put practices in place that limit the undue influence of special interests and money and long-term politicians that don't necessarily have your interests at heart, but whatever it is that their private issue is. And so I think term limits is a central part of that. Because if you look at everyone who has gotten themselves in trouble in Colombia, and I learned last night, I'll have to confirm this, but it's 57 people under investigation and a few under indictment already, that most have one thing in common, and you can guess it. They've been there a long time. And so that has been almost a metaphor for, I think, part of who I am, which I figure we'll have a chance to talk about, or at least who I think I am.
Okay.
And the larger issue of how do we put things in place or a structure in place that tries to eliminate that outside influence that clouds the judgment of people who are voting and our legislators away from the interest of the people and the interest of their own little area of the state or their own little area of concern that may not be in all of our best interest.
You talk about term limits and obviously corruption going on at the South Carolina State House. How did we get here in your mind?
I don't think anybody goes to Columbia to do wrong things or get themselves in trouble. Every person who is running for office, I think there's two parts that drive it. There are things that are not being talked about, such as in my case, that you want to go further those issues, and you get to a point in your life where you've got the time, treasure, and talent that you want to go invest. But the other thing is we all have something that we want to get out of it personally. Nobody spends this much time and money to go get a $10,000 a year job without having something that they want personally out of it. For me, it's the opportunity to grow and learn and contribute. And I hope that comes back to me in ways that I can't even understand yet.
Grow, learn, and contribute.
Right.
What do you want to do to help grow House District 99?
We've got to look. House District 99, compared to a lot of other areas of the state, we're in an enviable position. We got an update last night from Mac McQuillan, the Berkeley County School Board.
My man.
I like Mac, crazy hair.
Good guy.
Jovial guy.
Yes.
I want to take Mac home with me. I want to keep him as a pet just because
Jesus.
he's so much fun to have around. You know?
Really?
But he had a fantastic update about schools in Berkeley County. And so, you know, we all talk about education.
Okay.
I think when we talk about problems in education, we're not talking about House District 99. We all have needs and wants and desires. We don't want to have teachers having to contribute, you know, their own funds for school supplies. And so I know issues are there. We're all concerned about how do we achieve the delicate balance of development and conservation. So I know that's of great importance. How do we grow the economy with the types of jobs that we want?
Okay.
Clean jobs that are high paying,
Okay.
and that actually, you know, contribute back to our quality of life, not take away from it. So you'll hear me and all the other candidates and everybody you talk to on the street is going to say almost the same things. I think, and this is a little bit beyond your question, but it's something that I wanted to talk about, is what makes me think that I can actually be the one to do it. I mean, at the end of the day, I consider myself very much just like you. I don't know that we're much different. One of us is not any smarter or more talented than the other. I don't think one has bigger drive. I do think that the way I go about working with people makes a big difference. I am easy to forgive and forget. The last vote was the last vote, and if I lost that one, we're on to the next issue. And I think for so many people, politics and the legislative process gets personal. It's not personal. It's never about you and how you won or lost. It's what you're doing for everybody out there. And so you've got to have that quality. Otherwise, we get the tension that we see now, especially on the national level, and even at the state level. I mean, I think I mentioned it the other day.
Right.
You know, we should be the envy, or we are the envy of states almost everywhere. We've got a Republican House, a Republican Senate, a Republican governor.
Right.
We should be cranking out legislation that's good for everyone at a record pace. Instead, what do? We don't have a Democrat that is involved with the leadership in those three central legislative pieces. So we argue amongst ourselves instead. And it's been said that we've got truly 3 Republican parties that are in the state house, and we can't get 2 of the 3 to talk to each other enough to agree on things. So I know your question. It's how do we change that? And I would like to think it's more people like me who has the disposition that I just described to you of we've got to get past the pettiness, and we've got to try to put our personal preferences aside and try to do what's right for for South Carolina and for, for your region. And typically, I'm the kind of guy that's been seen in mainly my work history. I've never run for office before, so I can't pull from that like I can my work history. Is someone who is very pleasant to work with, that you want to reach out to, that you may want to reach across the aisle or across a philosophical line. And I think that's what we need more of. We need more people looking for what are the commonalities amongst us rather than what are the dividing lines.
And you talk about learning. What have you learned about the constituents of House District 99?
Yeah, I have, I think like every candidate will tell you, been knocking on a ton of doors.
Yeah.
And in a digital world where there's probably a heck of a lot easier way to meet people
Sure.
and connect, I think you're under an obligation to put yourself in front of voters, and as unnerving as it can be, because you don't have any idea what's going to come at you. But most people have been surprisingly congenial,
Yeah.
and they love the notion that someone showed up to their door, even if they don't agree with you philosophically.
Okay.
So whether it has been Goose Creek or Mount Pleasant or Daniel Island or Hanahan, I have a renewed faith in people, because I've had some fantastic conversations with people that I know don't agree with me.
Wow.
There are a lot of commonalities, all the issues that we've talked about earlier, roads, education, whatnot. Hanahan, a lot of doors that I knock on there. One of the first questions is about what are we going to do about flooding in Turkey Creek, and so there are some hyper local issues that don't affect everybody as a whole, and everyone has espoused their theory on how that water gets from where it was to pooling in their backyard. But generally speaking, it's been a spiritual renewal of my love of people, and that's what's been wonderful about running. Is I've got a great excuse to go out and meet people. There's some parts that I have not loved as much, so I don't like fundraising, and I'm learning how to do that, but I'm not very good at it yet, and it shows. I've probably raised about $7,000, $8,000, and I may put almost that much into it myself personally, just to be able to do the fundamentals of what you have to do to realistically compete. My personal opinion is that if you have to spend or raise much more than that to go get a $10,000 a year job, voters have to begin asking questions. What are the motivations behind the person running? So, that being said, I know your original question was.
Oh, no worries.
I love interviews like this where we start here, we end up way over here somewhere. Those are the best things. We just forget the camera's there altogether. But anyway, I don't know where we were headed, but I'm ready for your next question.
And if you get to Columbia, what would you contribute personally?
Mm-hmm. We've talked a little bit about that earlier. I think I've got the personality and the disposition to go into confrontational rooms or circumstances and try to walk out with a few more friends than I walked in with. I'm a finance major, and so I'll build a spreadsheet for anything. My friends joke with me about the things I'll build spreadsheets for, and it speaks back to I like to use data and information and experts to try to inform the decisions that I make, and particularly as it relates to larger scale decisions on a statewide level or a region level. Is I believe you've got to have a big tent attitude. That you've got to invite everybody to the table that may have an input that is reasonable, even if it's the ones you don't really care for or want at the table, because there's value in making sure that you don't have the law of unintended consequences when you pass legislation, and without having everybody who has a vested interest at the table, that'll happen, and that'll be bad for South Carolina.
Let me ask you this way: if there was a pie chart right here,
Mm-hmm.
what else would be at the top of your chart besides flooding and the infrastructure and education and SCANA and
Yeah. Well, those are the main ones that I am hearing about. Almost every door that I go to, I actually ask people who aren't all that verbose. I'll ask, is anything on your mind? What else, what are other issues? And the range has been everything from someone who wanted to talk for 20 minutes about recycling, excuse me, to littering.
Right. Yeah.
Somebody had to just say, those are the extremes, and everything in the middle. I think, and I'm going to stick with my central theme.
Okay.
Because I believe it's a spoken hub approach, that none of these other issues, no matter what they are, they do not get fixed at least in the time period or at all, unless we truly have a strong ethical compass. And I don't know that we can rely on every individual in the House and the Senate and in government to do that. So it's up to folks like myself who feel strongly about that, to put in term limits, to put in other structures that enforce the ethics piece of the puzzle. And I that would be a critical role for me. If I couldn't get that passed, or at least make incremental progress on that throughout my legislative career, I would probably choose to just come back home and try to give that to somebody else. Because I think it is, especially what I've learned since running, especially, it is really honed and focused that message.
What have you learned about yourself during this particular campaign?
Yeah, one of the reasons that I mentioned to you earlier that I think everybody should run for office is it forces you to look internally. It forces me to be a better person, and even in small ways. I'm a lot more mindful of traffic laws now. You never know who's going to be watching. Out on the side of my car, it's got the magnets.
Right.
I watch what I say and how I say it. It's almost like having my preacher standing behind me constantly, or just sitting on this shoulder. And it's a good reminder of what it does is it takes you back to who you are really at your core, because we, depending on the company we keep or that we have at the moment, we may stray from who we are ourselves. But when you're talking to someone who you've never met before, and you've got to have a conversation with them, and they're peppering you with very reasonable questions, you've got two choices. You can either sit there and try to be the palm reader and detect, what do I say to make this person happy, or you make the decision that I have, which has made my life easier, actually, and say, I'm just going to tell the truth about what I believe, and if that resonates with enough people, I'll get to go do the job that I'm applying for. And if not, I don't, and I get to go do some of the other things that I've got an interest in. And so, especially, part of to cap off your question is you get exposed to so many things when you're a candidate, new people that you've never met before and would have never had the opportunity to meet, issues and groups that you may have known a little bit about but didn't know enough about or feel strongly about. So as I've gone door knocking and meeting people, I've actually literally circled people's names and addresses, written notes to come back and see that person for one reason or another, because they knew something or they felt strongly about something or were involved with something that I would really enjoy. And those are the reasons to run for office in the way that some of them have affected me and changed me.
Let me see.
Pie chart again.
No, not that. Let's erase politics. So let's erase finance.
Okay.
Tell me, who else is Jarrod Brooks?
Yeah, I grew up in a kind of a middle class, or maybe even lower middle class. I love talking about the early family history. My grandfather on my dad's side, his father died when he was very young and had to quit school, so he had an 8th grade education. And from that, left the farm in Alabama and went to the big city of Columbus, Georgia, where I was born.
Wow.
And went to work for a man, and eventually That man passed on. He bought the business from him. It was the the back then version of Circuit City.
Right.
So they sold radios,
Right.
and then the technology came along, and then they sold TVs. And so on 8th grade education, he was able to accomplish all of that and run a business for the next 40 years, and then pass that on to his son, my uncle,
Right.
who ran it for the next. So a very simple man, but not simple-minded man,
Okay.
made that big of a difference in our family history. And so I think about that a lot. I can remember, with my dad, we were getting ready to go on vacation a few times, and the district manager called. He worked for Kmart
Right.
at the time, and he was such a hard worker that we had to postpone that vacation because the guy was coming in, and he wanted things to be perfect.
Right.
And so when you have kind of that as your family background, you're either compelled or it's just become a habit to work that hard and be that diligent.
Mm.
So that would be one, I think, is a strong pedigree of hard work. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps and make the best of yourself that you can. And two is a pretty balanced approach to almost anything. I'm a super fun guy to be around, but I know when to get serious.
Okay.
I'm not a big believer in the extremes of almost anything, whether it's society or theologically or philosophically, that most of us operate in the really murky part, in the gray, in the middle. And whether it's the issue of pro-development or pro-conservation, the answer's not on either side of these arguments. It's somewhere in the middle. And so I think I like to listen to my heart and my constituents and the experts around
Right.
to try to find what that murky middle is for almost every issue.
Jarrod Brooks, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate this.
It's been fun. I hope we get to do it again.
Yeah, thank you. We will. Thank you.